first, there is a gentleman in this studio who learned hillbilly Marxism at the knee of his grandpappy. And that man's name is David Griscom. That's actually pretty good.
I like it.
I think this is the hillbilly Marxist minute. By the way,
I don't think hillbilly is a
That's
Texas.
what my bio says.
what did you say?
Honky tonk Marxist.
Honky tonk Marxist. I like hillbilly Marxist better. Do we have honky tonk Marxist is really good though? Do we have the right graphic up for this? Because we used the wrong one the other day.
Yes, we do.
Okay, and it was back to economic.
Yeah.
All right,
A throwback.
By the way,
Yeah.
there might be another extremely prominent Marxist economist joining this show sometime soon, who might also want to kick your ass. David Griscom.
I'm glad I've been in the gym.
What do we got, brother?
Yeah, unfortunately, this is a very tragic story that has been missed a lot, and it's been going on for a long time, but it is the plight of the rural hospitals across the country. Now, obviously, we're facing a healthcare crisis for everybody in the United States, but it's really hitting rural communities hard. Just so people can understand this, currently 21% of rural hospitals are at high risk of closing. And when you start to look at specific states, for example, Alabama, 50% of rural hospitals are at high risk of closing. In Maine, 40% of rural hospitals are at high risk of closing. And in Michigan, 25.4% are at high risk of closing. And not only is this really dangerous for people who need health care, it's really damaging for local economies, because that means that all the registered nurses, all the doctors, all the people who work in the healthcare system lose their jobs and then leave the community, zapping a massive portion of economic activity and taking areas that are already very deprived economically and making them much, much worse. And then, of course, we're talking about no access to ambulance services. If there's any kind of emergency, people having to drive 2 to 3 hours to get to the nearest hospital. And this crisis is especially bad in states that have blocked Medicaid expansion in recent years. So obviously a lot of Republican-run states have been really hit hard by this crisis. Shout out to my former professor, Luke Mayville, for doing the important work in Idaho of fighting for Medicaid expansion. But even that, even getting that on the ballot, they're still having to fight the state government there for it. So they
tried to lula Luke.
No, I mean,
we'll talk about that more later. They literally, one of the far right groups tried to put fake campaign finance charges on him. This stuff is real.
Yeah, Mayville Livre.
Mayville Livre.
I mean, seriously, those are really despicable when you start to see and you realize that they're playing with people's lives. And this is a larger story here, and I think we should cover this again in the future. But the story of rural America, where you've seen the disappearance of a lot of industry and manufacturing that created a lot of these towns. And then also just the dominance of massive agribusiness that's destroyed local farms. I mean, people, if you want to do like any kind of agriculture, like raising pigs or beef on a small scale, it's really difficult to do that because the rule book is so skewed in the favor of these massive corporations. Mm-hmm. But obviously, these areas are facing obviously the issues of there not being enough economic activity and also smaller numbers in communities to maintain a hospital, but then also a lot of people who are uninsured, and especially in these rural communities, these are people making like $7.50, $8, $9 an hour. When they go into the emergency room, then they basically, put that money becomes bad debt that the hospital's carrying. So especially in these really poor communities, it's really difficult for them to operate because people aren't able to afford their medical bills in the first place. And our Medicaid system currently, even though it's very important to expand Medicaid as possible, you're not paying a full dollar as you would from private insurance. So they actually get paid a little bit less than they typically would. So those hospitals also are operating with smaller margins. So this is why when we talk about Medicare for All, it's such an important fight, because a lot of these hospitals, especially in poor communities that have had to shut down because they just can't operate on their current insurance system using Medicaid in the first place, Medicare for All is going to massively expand the amount of money that goes into those hospitals and allowing that care to be maintained. Bernie Sanders has been a real leader in trying to fight to make sure that rural hospitals don't close. He wants to make sure that communities have the first right to be able to buy hospitals if they are going under. He wants to make sure that the United States federal government is investing in rural communities, and especially their hospitals, but also their economies in general, so that these people aren't being left behind. So one, when we're talking about this massive hospital crisis, Medicare for All is a huge part of changing that. And then also a jobs guarantee, because one of the most important things about the jobs guarantee is that we can direct where we want that investment to go. So communities that have been underserved by the economy for a very long time can be revitalized in a few years. We've done it once before with the WPA as a part of the New Deal. Not only do we think about, when we talk about the WPA, we're talking about things like the Cathedral of Learning in Pittsburgh. Yeah. We're talking about all these incredible investments in major cities, but also public parks, a lot of town squares. If you go through a lot of rural towns in America, you actually will see, oh wow, this statue here, this public park was created as part of the New Deal. We can revitalize these communities. We can invest in universal child care. We can invest in all these communities if we have the political will, and we move away from a system of extraction that has left the majority of people behind, and especially rural Americans very far behind. And just, one really quick point to, when we're talking about this, it's certainly a class issue, but it's also a racial justice issue. If you want to say that you stand with black and brown people, you need to be talking about black and brown people across the United States South. There's huge concentrations of black rural communities that have been so underserved because of racism, because of capitalism, and because of the American system. And we really want to revitalize those communities, and that's going to be a huge part of any kind of left or socialist future.
100%. So would he take you out fishing?
Bernie?
No, I'm talking like your pappy, grandpappy. Your Uncle Pappy.
My Uncle Pappy?
Yeah,
I was a hunter. I was a hunter and I fished.
Like, we're gonna go out to the gorge. You're gonna learn about the labor theory of value, young man.
But I grew up on a ranch, and I took care of cattle.
Yeah.
And we raised goats. It's something that's important to me for a lot of reasons. So I'm familiar with that part of the world too.
You're gonna skin the goats. Talk about the enclosure of the commons, young man.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. This actually sounds like a very cool guy that I'm making up in my head.
Yeah, I wish that was the case.
Yeah. Yeah, well, we all wish that things like that were the case. Okay. So, a couple of segments to get to. We're going to have a bit of a shorter show this week and get faster to the postgame. What happened?
No, just a minor audio hiccup.
Uncle Pappy didn't
it was
teach you how to
electrical.
handle the electrics. I like this. Uncle Pappy, David Griscom's Marxist economic mentor. It's like what they didn't tell you about was that the base defines the superstructure. Your problem is, young man, you're high. You're high on superstructure, low on base. It's also the way he taught you about the birds and the bees. You just watched a Michael Brooks show video. Subscribe to get them all. Why wouldn't you? Don't be foolish. Click subscribe below and become a patron as well. Patreon.com/TMBS. Thanks, everybody.